Trump has never known such shame. Biden slammed his successor in front of everyone. A devastating speech that silenced the American leader. There's no point in hiding it anymore. Trump's approval ratings are plummeting. Right after Biden, the Pope pulls the rug out from under the American leader. The people are openly protesting the government, and Europe is only adding fuel to the fire. Former allies are literally vanishing, and Trump's behavior only fuels the conflict. Is America truly on the brink of fateful changes in the halls of power? More on all this next. Watch until the end. Hello. This is Ukraine Today. I'm Darina Gutskalo with the latest events. What has been hidden for so long has finally broken into the public sphere. Joe Biden took to the Democrats' public stage and literally tore Trump apart. The former United States president called the current head of the White House a narcissistic failure and accused him of blatant and brazen corruption. Emotions have finally taken over.
It's not just his vanity projects, tearing down the East Wing of the White House for his own ballroom, putting his name on the Kennedy Center, building an arch in his own honor, even hiring his own pool boy to fix the reflecting pool. Wow, what a loser.
Biden's 10-minute speech was one of the sharpest attacks on Donald Trump since he left office. And symbolically, this speech came exactly 2 years after his participation in the presidential debates against Trump on CNN, which effectively changed the course of his political history and dashed his second-term ambitions. Most interestingly, right now Trump's position is weakening before our eyes, ratings are crashing, and experts are already sounding the alarm. The situation is becoming increasingly unpredictable.
Polls now show that President Trump's disapproval rating among voters outside his far-right base is rising rapidly. According to Fox polls, 61% of voters disapprove of his performance.
The diagnosis is clear. Political pressure on Trump is intensifying in the United States, and the opposition of the first American Pope is increasingly seen as a factor in his gradual loss of influence ahead of the election.
While Donald Trump is losing support in the polls, the Pope has become the most popular leader among Americans. He is viewed positively by 57% of respondents, according to Gallup data.
Western media are already suggesting that his public stance, which clashes with Trump's, could be an additional blow to the president ahead of the election and further weaken his political weight.
I am not afraid of the Trump administration or of speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel, which is why I believe I am here.
Note that such open statements against the Trump regime are not isolated incidents. Pope Leo XIV and U.S. President Donald Trump are in a serious political standoff. The cause of the rift is U.S. actions in the Middle East and Washington's migration policy. It seems the situation is escalating to the limit. Already, the current U.S. president is losing the battle for American sympathies. According to poll results, the Pope's net favorability rating is plus 32, while Trump's is minus 22. And most importantly, 60 million American Catholics are increasingly leaning toward the pontiff.
The conflict, born from Trump's desire for hype and narcissism, could cost Republicans dearly this fall.
And that's not all. Trump is gradually becoming toxic to European allies. Even right-wing politicians are starting to distance themselves, and U.S. political support in Europe is turning from an asset into a problem. As Politico writes, due to tariff wars, the conflict over Iran, and the U.S. president's scandalous statements, his allies in Europe are starting to keep their distance. Trump's main ally in Europe, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, has suddenly shifted into a mode of tough response. After Trump's claims about her alleged request for a photo at the G7, Meloni publicly set the record straight and made it clear that such stories have nothing to do with reality. Moreover, she advised the American president to think more about his own ratings, which are rapidly declining.
Friendship with Trump certainly didn't help me.
In France, a noticeable cooling toward Trump is also being recorded. Jordan Bardella of the National Rally spoke sharply about his unpredictable policies and effectively rejected the idea of any support. In European political circles, the term poisoned gift has even appeared. This is how Trump's influence on the right is described. And most interestingly, even among their voters, there are fewer and fewer who see him as an ally of Europe. Total shock. Even Macron didn't expect the situation to unfold this way. Donald Trump is back in the spotlight, but this time not for loud political statements, but for a series of strange and quite funny moments that quickly went viral. What was supposed to look like a show of strength and Western unity suddenly turned into a series of awkward scenes and unexpected episodes that are already being turned into memes. And even Trump's attempts to reclaim his role as the main player only added fuel to the fire. And now the main question, is this a controlled political game or a signal that the situation is slipping away even from his closest allies? Let's take a look. Trump suddenly lost his signature weapon. And no, this time it's not about sanctions or loud statements, but about handshakes. At the G7 summit, Donald Trump shook Emmanuel Macron's hand so limply that body language experts almost declared a state of emergency. The man who for years turned every handshake into a distinct form of geopolitical struggle suddenly produced what experts called the dead fish effect. It looked especially funny against the backdrop of previous meetings between the two leaders. In the past, Trump liked to literally pull his counterparts toward him, showing who's in charge. But this time everything went off script. During the greeting, his hand went limp and Macron even tried to lift it like a lifeguard trying to revive a sinking symbol of American dominance. The most interesting moment for experts was just before the handshake itself. The video shows Trump closing his eyes and avoiding eye contact. One psychologist even suggested it looked as if the American president was thinking, "God, give me strength." For a man who usually radiates bulldozer-level confidence, the scene was quite unusual. However, an explanation was found. Experts suggested the reason might be quite simple: fatigue after a loud birthday celebration. And it seems the now 80-year-old Trump was a bit out of shape. Handshakes between leaders have long since become a political genre of their own. Once it was Trump who set the rules of the game, turning a simple greeting into a show of force. But this time, the picture was the exact opposite. Instead of the usual tug-of-war, the world saw a man who looked like his biggest challenge wasn't international crises, but just wanting to get some sleep. And you must admit, for a president who loves to project energy and dominance, this sounds like a political joke in itself. But as it turned out, the problem wasn't fatigue at all, because while the United States leader barely had the strength for a dead fish handshake with the French president, he had plenty of energy for Brigitte Macron. During the official photo op, Donald Trump didn't just greet the First Lady of France. According to reporters, he literally brushed past Macron himself to give Brigitte special attention. Hugs, kisses on both cheeks, smiles, and an incredibly long handshake that lasted about 14 seconds. Body language experts were most amused by the details of this scene. According to them, the American president was performing an almost performative ritual of bonding. Trump touched Brigitte's hand several times, escorted her off the stage, and looked remarkably energetic. It seems that somewhere between the handshake with Macron and meeting his wife, the United States president managed to have an energy drink. And the funniest part is that this whole diplomatic theater unfolded right before the eyes of the French president. One expert even joked that Macron looked like he was trying to get back into the frame and remind everyone who the head of state is. But the public's attention had long been focused elsewhere. And while analysts look for hidden geopolitical signals, ordinary viewers are drawing a much simpler conclusion. Maybe Trump's problem wasn't a lack of energy. It's just that he has much more of it for some people than for others. In the end, the G7 summit risks being remembered for more than just talks on wars, sanctions, and global security. Because while some leaders discuss the planet's future, the internet is already buzzing about another question. How is it that for Macron, Trump only had a dead fish, but for Brigitte, a whole festival of diplomatic tenderness? But these events weren't enough for Mr. Trump. Donald decided to finally reclaim his reputation as the alpha male of world politics. Approaching the negotiation table at the G7 summit, Trump suddenly loudly told world leaders, "I'm the boss here. Hello there."
Well, I'm the boss.
And he said it so unexpectedly that those present could only laugh. After shouting that he's the boss, Trump also gave British Prime Minister Keir Starmer a friendly pat on the back, like a CEO who just finished a morning briefing. Interestingly, the reaction from other leaders was surprisingly restrained. It seems those present are used to any summit with Trump eventually turning into a separate show with its own script, jokes, and unexpected improvisations. But the real irony lies elsewhere. While Trump was loudly proclaiming himself the leader, social media was busy discussing completely different footage from the summit. In one group photo near the G7 logo, the American president stood slightly apart while other diplomats chatted among themselves in small groups. And here, a rather funny contrast arises. Formally, "I'm the boss here," but on screen is a man who seems to have lost his group for a few seconds at a big party. The entire summit increasingly resembles a series about the adventures of a character who refuses to be just one of the participants. First, everyone discusses his mysterious fatigue next to Macron, then the record-warm interaction with Brigitte Macron, and now the loud claim about who's in charge. And it seems that regardless of the agenda, sanctions, wars, or global crises, Donald Trump once again achieves his main goal. He makes the whole world talk about his favorite person, himself. However, there is one small problem. The louder someone reminds others they're the boss, the more often those around them feel a natural urge to check if it's actually true. And that's why Trump's phrase instantly became one of the most discussed quotes of the summit. After all, in international politics, status is defined not by words, but by whether others are willing to play by your rules. And world leaders are still searching for the answer to that question.
And even NATO is coming out with a very tough signal. Secretary General Mark Rutte is ramping up the rhetoric, but most interestingly, behind the scenes, a new diplomatic game is unfolding. Rutte is maintaining a delicate balance not just with allies, but also with Trump, effectively reshaping political priorities for a new reality. More details on this in the report coming up in just a moment. NATO now speaks without hesitation about Ukraine's victory and is even securing an advantage for Kyiv with its own hands. After the latest meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made a clear statement: the Kremlin is not achieving its goals on the battlefield. Speaking at a press conference in Berlin, he emphasized that Russian troops are facing serious difficulties. Despite constant pressure and offensive attempts, the occupying army is showing no strategic success. However, according to Mark Rutte, allies must continue to strengthen support for Ukraine as the war goes on and leaves no room for pauses. We cannot lose sight of Ukraine, the NATO Secretary General emphasized. After all, the world is simultaneously facing a number of other security challenges. But Russian aggression remains one of the key threats to European stability. He specifically stressed that Russia continues massive attacks, striking Ukrainian cities and infrastructure virtually around the clock, day and night. That is why the issue of supporting Ukraine remains at the forefront of the international agenda. During the Ramstein format meeting, the allies reaffirmed their financial commitments. In 2025, Ukraine was promised about $60 billion in military aid. It is not just about the volume, but also about the quality of support. Among the main priorities is strengthening air defense systems, which protect Ukrainian cities from missile and drone attacks. Also in focus is the development of drone technologies, which play an increasingly important role on the modern battlefield. A special emphasis is on the supply of long-range ammunition, which allows Ukrainian forces to hit targets in the enemy's rear and weaken their military potential. NATO emphasizes that supporting Ukraine is not just a matter of solidarity, but an investment in the security of all of Europe. And as long as the war continues, the allies are determined to maintain unity and continue assistance for as long as it takes. However, behind the scenes of diplomacy, the situation looks much more complicated. According to Politico, citing insiders, Mark Rutte is forced to play a delicate political game in relations with US President Donald Trump. It is not just about diplomacy, but about maintaining key support for Ukraine from the United States. According to sources, the NATO Secretary General deliberately uses soft rhetoric and even public compliments toward the American leader. And he does this with one goal: to prevent a reduction in military aid to Ukraine. Within the alliance, such steps have caused a mixed reaction. Earlier, Western media reported dissatisfaction among some allies with Rutte's overly complimentary statements regarding Trump's decisions. However, as insiders explain, this strategy is based on a clear calculation. NATO's ability to help Ukraine directly depends on Washington's position, and thus on how effectively the Secretary General manages to find common ground with Donald Trump.
If this means that the US will continue to supply weapons and share intelligence, then such a tactic is justified.
In fact, it is about a complex balance between political rhetoric and strategic interests. Mark Rutte himself, according to sources, believes that even public flattery is a small price to pay if it helps maintain support for Ukraine in the war. After all, the key goal remains unchanged: to ensure the conditions for Ukraine's victory and deter further Russian aggression. And the main logic explained by sources citing Politico is,
the focus is on what is best for Ukraine. If this means that the USA will continue to sell weapons to Ukraine and share intelligence data, then he is making the right decisions.
diplomacy on the edge of psychology. According to this logic, Rutte's key goal is not confrontation, but keeping the USA in the system of support for Ukraine through personal contact with Trump. Insiders describe this as a pragmatic approach: less pressure, more personal communication, and maintaining Ukraine's access to weaponry and intelligence. Ukraine is at the center of the whole game. The article emphasizes that for the NATO chief, the main thing is precisely the result for Ukraine.
This takes off some of the pressure. And if it means continuing support for Ukraine, it's the right decision.
Who actually wins in this game? In parallel, Western political circles are discussing the broader context, the role of the USA in the war, European unity, and the stability of arms supplies to Ukraine. And against this background, another important emphasis appears. Public support for Ukraine in the USA and Europe remains significant despite political controversies. What does this actually mean? In fact, we are talking about a complex diplomatic system. NATO is trying to maintain unity, using personal channels of influence, and the main goal is not to lose support for Ukraine. And the main question? Can personal diplomacy become a key factor in deciding the fate of military aid to Ukraine? The answer, it seems, is being formed right now in the corridors of NATO and Washington. Recall that all this happened after a scandalous meeting. Trump exploded against NATO. Loud accusations and hints of revenge. U.S. President Donald Trump sharply criticized NATO allies during a closed-door meeting. His interlocutor was the alliance's Secretary General Mark Rutte, and what was supposed to be routine negotiations turned into a real political explosion. According to sources, the atmosphere was extremely tense.
It went sideways. The conversation was nothing but a tirade of insults.
Moreover, Trump, according to insiders, apparently threatened to do anything. The main grievance is Iran. The reason for the outrage is the lack of support for the USA from Europe in the conflict over Iran. Trump made it clear the allies failed to meet expectations and this could have consequences. According to sources, he is even considering options for reprisals, wants concrete actions from partners, and insists on the rapid opening of the Strait of Hormuz. However, a White House spokesperson stated that the president made no demands on the alliance in his conversation with Rutte. After the meeting, a public explosion on social media. Trump did not hold back.
NATO was not there for us when we needed them, and they will not be there if we need them again. Remember Greenland? That big, poorly managed piece of ice? None of these people understood anything until they were pressured.
But NATO responds. Alliance representative Alison Hart categorically disagrees with the negative assessments. She stated, "The meeting was very frank and at the same time constructive." But can a conversation where threats are made be called constructive?
And what do you think about the latest events? Write your opinion in the comments, like the video, and stay up to date with the main news. More to come. See you!